Hello and welcome to this panel for MEIOU and Texas. I'm joined by several team members to present our content extension mod for Europa Universalis 4. I'm Gigau, I'm the project lead and the cartographer.
Hello, welcome to this panel. I am Beorsferth. I am the team organizer for the team tools like Git and also a programmer on the team working on flavor and other systems like diplomacy and among other topics.
Hello, I am Mepper from the Netherlands. I work mainly on quality assurance and content creation. I port a lot of flavor events, write new flavor, and help a lot of testing, finding issues, solving bugs.
Hi there, I'm FireKahuna. I mainly work as a systems programmer, mainly working on 3.0's political system and also just more broadly around the mod.
And I'm Count Christo. I'm having stolen valor today. I'm not actually a member of the team, but I'll be standing in for the community, asking your questions to everyone else here.
And without further ado, before a Q&A based on questions asked by the community, we're going to do a presentation on MEIOU and Texas. MEIOU and Texas, v3.0, how we got there, what we wanted to do, and why it took a number of years. Originally, MEIOU and Texas was born as MEIOU, a EU3 mod born in 2007, followed by Death in Texas, created by Luke in 2011. MEIOU was working more on flavor for historical plausibility, and Luke was working more on mechanics for that historical plausibility. And in 2013, EU4 was released, and we decided to merge our mods and work together. So MEIOU and Texas started as a mod with the new map, new projection, historical flavor, part of it based on what was in MEIOU and Death in Texas. And a few years later, we started working with populations. Initially, in 2017, V2 was one population, one development point in admin, diplomacy, or military was 10,000 people. The problem is that we were having to fight the system, fight the game. So in 2018, we started moving towards real population and then having the development values calculated based on those population. So that taxes and manpower values weren't based on fixed units. Later, we went towards a simulation that requires simulation, and that's 3.0, on which we will elaborate a little more. And I give the hand to Beorsferth.
So let's come to why we even developed or started to develop 3.0. After 2.5, we moved back to the development-based systems. And the problem with, well, every iteration that came after 2.0 was that the code base got really gigantic, undocumented, and really hard to work with. It was partially even back from the old EU3 MEIOU mod, which meant the code base was, well, it was a mess, let's say it like that. So we decided to redo, well, basically the whole mod. Besides that, we got a number of new modding features. Before, like for 2.0 development, we only had variables, basically. And then more advanced modding tools like while loops and meta scripts got introduced by Paradox, which allowed us to do a number of more things which were originally not possible. We reached our performance limit in 2.0 and hope to really improve what we could do in a new code environment. The original idea for 3.0 was basically to split up populations, not only in rural and urban, but also between different classes like peasants, nomads, burghers, etc. So we had a number of different ideas, which morphed into one goal to develop 3.0, which then, well, we thought would only take a few months, but in the end, it took a long time. So why did the development of 3.0 took so long, as the members in our community keep asking us when it's going to be released? So the first problem, of course, was that we basically decided to redo the entirety of MEIOU in Texas, which has a gigantic code base. So this in itself is a lot of work. But then also the first idea for classes, well, it was a good idea, but it wasn't really thought through, and it led to a lot of iterations. So we had a lot of iterations in the development. For example, for the trade system, we had, I think, three iterations. We had a trade system based on vanilla trade nodes, then we had a provincial-based trade system, and now we have the sector-based trade system. So there were a number of big iterations in the big systems, which led to a lot of development time. Besides that, what caused a lot of development time was just figuring out how to integrate all of those really complex simulation systems with vanilla. So how are armies created when everything is based on populations? So how do we basically get our simulation values back into the vanilla game? Besides that, there are a number of other issues, a number of systems like institutions, which are really hard to design, not really to code, but to design, which just took a long time. And all of those iterations and systems will now be introduced to you by FireKahuna, the main system designer.
In 3.0, we wanted to start with a new population system that would build on what we did for 2.5, where we had real values for all population, and we could set any value in the province UI to anything we wanted, like tax or manpower. So we're going to use that to create a simple economy based on a set of classes. As mentioned, we're going to have both like the normals, rural and urban divide with peasants and residents, but also include some other variants like serfs and plebs and literati for the elites. And this was meant to be the basis of like a new political system where classes would have real wealth that could be taxed. So that tax wouldn't just be generated, it would actually come from a real wealth pool. The main problem we had was that, to implement such an economy, you need to consider the idea of that wealth we're talking about, the real wealth, where does that come from? To bring the taxes back to M&T to the point where even classes can tax each other, we still need to figure out what would make that wealth. The solution to this was to implement another simple idea of supply and demand, where the principle of the market, where population would create goods and other people would make, population needs goods, so other people would make those goods, and you set a price based on the number of people needing it versus the number of people supplying it. That would create the principle of supply and demand. So obviously in that case, you need people being able to create goods. So we had the idea of creating industries like a, kind of a self-contained slot where within that slot you'd have like, a textile mill or kind of like the manufacturers in vanilla, but with a lot more data, the workers on it. So different classes would be able to work different slots. And an industry would be an all-encompassing concept that represents work being done in the province to create goods, which would replace the 2.0 mechanics around skill and such that it's, the idea is that these slots as well would be able to support any type of industry because they could just fill a slot with, say, a gold mining industry, a timber slot, an agricultural farm. It could be any type of industry and it would work there. So now that you have all these goods being created by workers who get paid even wages for their work, and you've got real money being created there, you've got real value, you've got supply, you've got demand, which is based on classes demanding different goods based on their wealth. The main problem you have is you have all these goods. How do you trade them? A market is supply and demand. So that led us to another system. This new system would be a trade system to create a market where supply and demand can meet. The problem that we had initially was, if you want to use the vanilla EU4 trade system, the main problem is that you have a network of nodes that are unidirectional. So every node connects in one direction to another node and works in a gameplay sense, but in real life, trade has to be bidirectional. Silk Road was bidirectional. So in that sense, this led to us having to go further. We basically used from the get-go, we always kind of used the trade node system in vanilla as a scope. Like all the provinces within a node could trade with each other. And so everything outside that node would be inter-node trade. And that became the basis to kind of keep the system performant. So the initial system we had just worked on that principle. We ignored countries, we ignored borders to keep performance down. And we created every single trade node, a single market where goods would be bought and sold. And then those nodes would trade with other. Initially, the main problem is that you ignore countries and you can't have things like mercantilism and embargoes and all the other things that make trade interesting. We tried to abandon our simple system and simulate even more. We had a direct province-to-province trade system where every province could trade with any other province with a link, and they would exchange goods with all those provinces, and then those provinces would trade with the provinces they had links to. It was a full, inter-province node across the entire world. The scoping, again, being the trade node system to decide which provinces they could trade with in one iteration. Problem there, it's too complex. Got finicky, things. So it's an example of, I think, the first real break in the economy. Even so, at the time, we had the economy working. We had a simulation at the time that had industry, economy, and population, real supply and demand, a working economy. So all that was left was the political system. The backbone of this new political system would be substates. The idea is that we would finally add something that isn't existent in EU4, which is sub-political entities. If you have a kingdom, you have a duchy, and you have a county. Even the Ottoman Empire had the Mamluk Sultanate as a sub-state during a large portion of its existence. The idea for it was actually theoretically performant and simple in the sense that every province would be assigned an ID, an ID for a county. That county would have a capital where you store data, and that would have an ID to another sub-state like a duchy, and that duchy would have an ID to a kingdom it belongs to. And so if the kingdom changes ownership, the duchy and the county doesn't need to know that they've changed ownership. The whole system theoretically would have worked. There was a whole hierarchy of substates, as mentioned, and even the actual tag itself in their capital was a substate. And each one of these sub-political entities would have their own rights, their own loyalty, and be able to break off and form independent realms using the state rebellion mechanic. Sadly, for all the hype, reality really hit us here in that the grand scope of 3.0 fell apart. The principal problem was that it was not fundamentally compatible with EU4, in the sense that EU4 has its own way of changing, province ownership, has its own fundamental set of laws, and you have to have an underlying system that's to update to every change in the world. When someone conquers a new province, you have to update the county, the duchy, the kingdom. Things kind of break. As well, the UI had no good way to display this. We had fancy stuff in terms of displaying the localization of the tag, but how do you allow the player to edit a substate, add new substates, remove ones, reform the realm, interact with them? It pushed the system too far, and this kind of created the first example of the system requiring a rethink. So the solution that was found was to go back. 2.0 introduced the estates. The estates were three national actors: the burghers, the nobles, and I believe the lesser nobles, so two versions of the nobles. And these were country level actors. We liked the idea of it. However, we were going to reuse that concept and build upon everything that had come before. So this is where we finally began creating what is known today as 3.0, in that we created the elites. The elites are the estates on a provincial level. Every province has their own elites, which is a class, and this elite shares all of its stats with the class, such as its wealth, and it uses that wealth for power. And if the population of the elites dies, that actually is technically affecting the class, vice versa. They're pretty much one and the same. And so these elites have their own power and their own loyalty in every province. And the national estate, as you would, is just an aggregate of the provinces. We also added the idea of rights, which is country laws that progress with time. It's more about the situation of the country. So, you have the rural countryside, and you have a right that decides the rights of the elites within that countryside. And on one scale is the more feudal estate, where nobles have complete power, complete autonomy. And on the other side, you have the modern bureaucracy, where the state rules supreme and bureaucrats collect tax without the nobles having any fundamental right to the land, unlike, say, a freeholder. They're one and the same. So player uses these rights and reforms to progress the nation through. This was a good opportunity to really integrate with all the systems, because rights affect political power, which affects the amount of tax that elites can collect, since they tax other classes to create their own wealth pools. which then affects their buying power within the economy, because as they lose wealth, they don't demand as many luxuries, which then affects the demand for goods, because those luxuries are demanded on the market, which can affect supply since they might not be as profitable, which can affect the prosperity of another realm entirely. All in theory, this was when we finally began to realize, I guess, the benefit of all these systems being integrated. And we added even more political concepts like the idea of a state, where you have an actual elite that is essentially the state, and that state has its own provincial level corruption, which affects how much tax gets siphoned off to the elites, which then enters the economy. And the estate also has its own influence, so the player has to build up the influence of the estate to create an alternative to elite governance. On top of that, we also brought back privileges from 2.0 and revitalized them for 3.0. So now you have privileges corrupting the elites, which allows them to take more power, which can often even block rights. You can think of, if the tree is rights, then the leaves are privileges. They stem from what the rights allow them to do. So all this was an example of basically what we reached with 3.0, in that we had a small ambition initially, which is to create a simple system. With time, we found a new equilibrium that sadly didn't include all our original ambition, but with the right amount of time, we did find a political solution. We didn't stop there. We went on further to religion. And to talk about Diagratia and religion in 3.0, here's Gigau.
And so we also wanted to modify religion. Religion, the Diagratia mod, it was one of the oldest features in MEIOU and Texas, because basically DARPA started working on it in 2007 or 2008. So it had a lot of old code because he was using the tools that were available at the time. We tried to add new stuff, use the tools as they were implemented by the Paradox team, but it still was very heavy. So with the rebuild for v3.0, we started using the new tools from Cradle and Civilization, the variable set of religions. So now the system is built from ground up, basically. We start with a minority system with slots and, so as I said, variables. Each province has one main slot for the main religion and 5 minorities. Those minorities and the main religion are split between their urban, rural, and elite populations. This leads us to some neat stuff, like, for example, like in 2.0, missionaries and the propagate religion policy allows us to convert only part of the population. There we have a first change, for example. In 2.0, these will convert like 20% of the population, regardless of the amount of population in that province. Now they will convert a number of people. Each effort will convert an amount of people. And so in sparsely populated provinces, you will need, for example, 1 missionary. In very densely populated provinces, it will take a lot more effort, so more missionaries to be sent. But also those that propagate religion policy will impact more urban population, because that's how it worked. The merchants, the Muslim and the Christian traders impacted obviously more the urban populations. In v3.0, as I said, we have to send more missionaries. So this leads to a shift. So now we will have missionary policies that allows you to have the missionary, when he finishes, to, if you want him to continue until conversion of the population, to have him remain in that province. Those populations shifts allow us to have a more fluid, more flexibility in the apparition or disappearance of heresies, like the Hussites or Reformation, and a lot of other features that are coming, which will ties us to more flavor that can be added both in religion and elsewhere. But for the other flavor, I will hand the floor to Mepper.
So for 3.0, we initially also decided that we wanted to rework all flavor, basically. A lot of the code was very old, and we wanted to make everything more dynamic, more optimized. And initially, our plan was to first rework all the 3.0 systems like trade, population, religion. And after that, when that part has been completed, to rework flavor on top of it and completely integrate all these systems with each other. And that is still sort of our end goal, but unfortunately, reality is kind of hard again, because it would have probably taken us another 2 years of development to finish 3.0 if we truly wanted to rework everything. So instead of that, we started porting back the 2.52 flavor events and disasters and decisions to 3.0, but try to, in the meantime, optimize them at least where possible for performance, and well, do a lot of playtesting with them and listen to feedback from our testers and improve upon everything. So basically 3.0 as it is now, in our current closed alpha state, has quite a lot of flavor. At least I think 2/3 of 2.52 flavor have been ported back over to 3.0. And there are quite some new, very cool flavor things added, like the rise of Timur or Tamerlane. The rise of the Ottoman Empire is modeled very nicely, and we have a new plague system, for example. We will port the 2.52 flavor, so what existed will be there in 3.0, and we'll try to integrate it slowly over time more and more with 3.0 systems. And now on the topic of how we optimize and refine our system. Along these years, we have done really a lot of internal quality assurance. It's been a lot of work to not only design these systems, but you have to make them, which is very hard, but then also they have to work out in reality. And how do you know that the systems you so nicely designed are performing well and that the AI can handle them and that the world kind of makes sense? We're sort of an alternate history simulation, so the world may differ from how real world history unfolded, but it still must be somewhat realistic and being impacted by the player in a meaningful way. So we have internal playtesters who playtest for us and give feedback, and we try to integrate that into our systems and flavor. And what we also started doing a lot is running observer games. This is basically to just let your computer play the game and versus the computer, no player involvement, and try to let it play out the entire game and just look at how the map progresses, how the economy progresses, which nations end up strong, and try to balance of what you see of the map. You have to sort of get a feeling of it. It's not really an exact science to balance the world and world history. So I put it in the slide. It's more like reading tea leaves. You look at data that is generated by the computer, you look at maps, you look at how provinces look, what cities are the biggest, how many wars are being fought, and basically try to, by experience and testing and refining again, make a fun and engaging world for, well, everyone to play EU4 in a different way. Well, since we're quite far progressed in development, we've a few months ago opened a closed alpha in which now some 130 testers have been invited to play the game and, well, of course, enjoy it, but also give feedback from playing, by which we can further optimize our systems. And, well, a lot of you, of course, want to know when will 3.0 release. Well, basically, we are quite far in the development, and we've been slowly opening up the closed alpha to more and more people, and you can be assured that this trend will continue in the near future.
And there you have it, our ambitious project, how it is, how we're working on it, and how we will hope we will be able to release as soon as we can. And in the meantime, to help you wait a little bit, we will be replying to some questions from the community.
Right, and now we get to the bit you've all been waiting for. It's the Q&A. These are questions that were asked by the community, both on the Paradox sub-forum dedicated to MEIOU and taxes, and on the community Discord. Obviously, you can and should join both of those. Links to be found to join the Discord are available around the place on Reddit and on the aforementioned forum. So without further ado, your questions. Where are the devs from, country-wise, asks Till Bardaga.
France, if I take the people who are here on the panel, France, Germany, Netherlands, Australia, but we also have represented Spain, Poland, the United States, Canada, Argentina, South Korea, and even we have a German member in Singapore.
And next question from Knickerbockers. Which dev is the most pro gamer?
In FPS, that would be Shirokuma Coffee. hands down. He plays CSGO, Apex, Valorant. But if we are going more for MEIOU and Taxis 3.0, that would be GGL for sure.
That's only because I haven't been playing it enough, you see, Gigau. It's all, we'll get
Sure.
there. We'll get there.
Yeah, we're looking forward to your next world conquest in 3.0.
I'm never doing that again. On the next question, Tilbardaga again asks, how was the design of 2.0 and 3.0 decided? Was it a common goal of some of the more senior team members, or was it some of the newer devs bringing fresh ideas?
It's actually a combination of both. We've always wanted to improve stuff, and we've had people who have applied saying, okay, we have new ideas, we have a lot of things that we would like to add. So yeah, a combination of both.
Is railroading still a thing in 3.0, asks Neon. I assume they're talking about things like the uniting of China or Ottoman expansion in Egypt, that kind of thing.
Yes, so basically railroading is... Well, basically, we have a lot of systems designed that should propel the world in a somewhat historically plausible way. But some events are basically historically correct, but they're very rare and can't really be modeled with systems. And for those, we put some railroading in place, like flavor events that make sure these things happen, or are at least likely. Should be in somewhat dynamic way. But our design intention is basically that we only do this in the first 50 years of the game. So that would be, for example, the Burgundian inheritance of the Netherlands and the rise of the Ottoman Empire. Great,
thank you. Vogel the Vogel, the most active man on the subreddit in the history of time, I believe, who deserves a shout out for always helping new players get in touch with the mod, asks how well the AI is handling 3.0.
Surprisingly well, actually. I think we taught it to reform their nation. They can use the new military system to basically fight, I think, quite as well as in vanilla. I mean, the AI is still, a bit dumb. And a good player will always be better than the AI or more skillful than the AI. But trust me, some AI, like, for example, if you start near the Ottomans, you will fear them.
Excellent. That's good to know. LSF asks, as of now, is the 3.0 AI better or worse than 2.52? So in terms of how much more or less scared of the Ottomans should we be?
I imagine that's like, it's a different set of challenges, you know. We've better embraced vanilla AI in the sense that in 2.5, the AI didn't always know exactly what they had. Because, like, you know, we had the off-map levies, but the AI don't know they have the off-map levies. So when they're deciding whether to declare war, they don't know that. So we had to force a lot of things with like a Great Predator script in 2.5 that kind of railroaded conquest. But in 3.0, the AI are mostly declaring wars on their own. There's a few instances where we do nudge the AI, but thanks to the fact that they see that, you know, all levies are on map in their manpower pool, in their force limit, they know exactly how much money they got, because we don't hide it from them and stash it away in purses. So they're handling, I guess, the vanilla aspects better, but it's just a different set of problems. Like, our internal AI has to deal with rights and it has to deal with reform and privileges, while things were a bit different and possibly simpler in that regard for AI. So overall, they're playing different.
Fair enough. Exactly. Fair enough. No, it's good to know. Bringing stuff into where the vanilla AI is used to working with is exactly. seems very promising. This is a question that needs a tiny bit of backstory, so I'll add that in. Communication efficiency, how well the state can communicate with its outlying provinces in 3.0 has links to rivers. You can have kind of aquatic communication efficiency taking place within your terrestrial nation across rivers. And Neon asks, is that the same in all rivers? Or do different rivers have different speeds? You know, does going upriver matter? All that kind of thing.
At the moment, it's same for all navigable rivers. So any river that we've deemed navigable is completely the same as any other river. The main reason is performance, but also just for gameplay, it's much simpler to understand that as long as two provinces technically connect within the same river network, like there's junction points where certain rivers connect to other rivers, but in that sense, they're both directions.
It would also maybe be good to add for players who are new to MEIOU and Texas what communication efficiency does. Basically, it is the time it takes for a messenger from your capital to every province basically in your realm. So if you're Spain and if you have to go from Madrid to Valencia, that takes a certain number of days. And the farther away your provinces are from your capital and the longer it takes for the messengers to basically give out your orders to your provinces, the more autonomous your provinces are and the less likely they are to do exactly what you want them to do. And what we allowed in 3.0 is messengers to travel by river as they did in real life, which is much, much faster than by land.
The main other thing is that in 3.0, we've also shifted the metric to be more of a measure of like capacity to rule an area. So in that sense, because the travel time is a little bit less important, it allows, you know, troops to bypass major obstacles, not have to pass through mountains and just bypass difficult terrain to reach an area directly. So in that sense, it's like a highway through, you know, certain Alps and certain areas where otherwise it would just take a long time to get through.
How can we fine-tune nationwide taxes in 3.0? Because obviously you've got this incredible new taxation system. How can players interact with that on a granular level?
Yeah, this one is interesting because when we first released the dev diary that showed like the whole tax system, people immediately feared, you know, micro hell because you have 20 buildings and in each building you can set a low, a medium, and a high level of any tax. So people immediately thought they'd have to manually set that in every single province. Not the case. The AI and the player share a delegator tool, which essentially looks at the amount of mana you assign it. It looks at what taxes there are, the value that you get out of each tax, and then spreads the tax buildings across your empire to maximize the amount of taxation you can get for a given mana level. So there's an option to fully automate it. For the small states, people who can handle medium states or the mentally insane, we have full manual control where you can set every single tax in every single province. We also have customization, like restricting certain taxes is going to be built into the delegator so that you can ensure certain taxes don't get added. Or just if people really request it, we can also add a full like manual kind of macro delegator where you can just set all taxes to a certain level across the realm as a baseline. So there's plenty of options to customize the tax system, and you can either go full micro or no micro at all.
How can we see information about our economy at a glance and know what doing various actions will do? You know, how can we foresee the impact of those actions with a kind of overview of the economy?
This one's always a challenge in the sense that, you know, there's a lot of information to display in 3.0, and the key thing is displaying relevant information. Because at a glance, you want to be able to, you know what's going on in the economy. At the same time, not all information is useless, so useful at a glance. So you can see, you know, taxation, you can see the industries and how much revenue they've made. You can also see like the trade system and the prices of goods in a certain province, and as well how many goods were traded. There's information about the terrain, you know, like the percentage of forest land there is, percentage of agriculture. At a glance as well, all in the first layer of modifiers there are. You can see property shares, you can see the amount of property in an area. And that's the other thing. We've added a layered UI system. So basically each modifier can have multiple layers of information. So the first layer can convey immediately important information that all players should see. And then if you click a button, it kind of rotates to the next layer of all the modifiers. So we have multiple. For people who really care about certain information, you can go through the layers and find that information if you desire. So you can either know things at a glance, or you can cycle through the modifiers and find even more information if you require on industry, tax, and trade.
You heard that right, dear viewer. We have nested tooltips. It's a great time. So I'm going to expand this question slightly. Someone's asking, what are you planning to do with the new stuff added in 1.31 and more broadly 1.30? Because of course the currently available version of MEIOU and Taxes is 1.29.
For the most part, I think it's a little too easy too early to tell. V3 v1.30 compatibility has been achieved fully with working, no longer crashing only very recently, thanks notably to Beorsferth, Mepper. So yeah, it's way too early to tell. Some things we'll have to do. For example, the canals, if we keep them, we will have to use the one from 1.31. Will we use the monuments, for example? I don't think it's still way up in the air.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Speaking of whether you'll use systems, is there going to be a new mandate system in 3.0 for the Chinese Empire?
There's plans and ideas. I think there was an event chain scripted or partially scripted that is going to need a lot of work, but probably for what post 3.0, there's a plan to create a rise and fall feature for Chinese dynasties where you'd have a chain that once mandate drops below a certain level, it would fall, and then once mandate's completely gone, there would be a civil war, and after that, there'd be a chain to getting it back. But at the moment, there's been a rebalancing of mandate. So mandate is based on devastation, but we've rebalanced all the factors. We've rebalanced how it's gained and the sources of it, so that generally mandate can fall. The bit we definitely need to work on is what happens when it falls, especially to help represent things like the classic Ming explosion from vanilla, but in a more realistic way.
Are there any changes in 3.0 coming to the HRE?
Yes, in the future, potentially, especially now that we have the 1.30 features, like Emperor obviously brought a lot of change to the HRE, like how it works in vanilla. At the moment, there has not been too much change. Some reforms have been changed. Some have been integrated with 3.0 systems. But eventually, the HRE will require large-scale rework, which kind of makes it a minigame inside of Europe, which is very diplomacy and dynastically focused, whereas the rest of Europe will probably be more focused on reforming and stuff like that, and conquest real politics, whereas the HRE is more like diplomacy and dynastics. But yeah, so far this has not been done. It might not happen in 3.0, but in 3.1 it will probably be included, yes.
Is immigration and colony immigration still a concept, or is that something that's already made, or is that something that might come later?
Yeah, so 3.0, as it's really focused on population, has a more general system of migration. So we have immigration and emigration from provinces. At the moment, this system is mainly based on the local economic situation. So if you have a province where especially peasants or residents of a city are very bad off, they will leave that province and move to a province where they have better living conditions, which is mainly determined by their wages. So this at the moment only includes provinces that you own yourself in your realm or your subject nations, which of course also includes your colonies. So in theory, people will move to your colonies. Colonies also have a general population growth bonus to represent the growth of colonies over the span of history. But this whole system will probably be expanded upon later, including migration based on religion and culture, or at least we hope that we can do that. It's not yet set in stone.
Has culture conversion changed at all in 3.0?
So, as many other minor systems, culture conversion has been completely recoded, so refactored, so that it's using the the newest modding tools, but generally it works the same at the moment as it has in version 2.5. It has gotten some additional attention to detail, so you have some more scenarios like culture conversions if Korea conquers Manchuria, and some other special situations which before were only very limited and mostly in the Levant, I think. So yeah, there has been some more details, but it generally works the same. Potentially it will be completely reworked at some point, but probably not for the initial release of 3.0.
Cool. Maybe it's good to add how it worked in 2.52. So basically the system works in a way that culture in provinces changes dynamically, whereas in vanilla you can spend diplomatic mana to change the culture in a province to any culture you like. And in MEIOU and Texas, this happens completely dynamically, and you can only influence it by either accepting or not accepting a culture in your realm. And accepted cultures, you will gain less unrest from those, but they will also they won't be converted to other cultures as fast as, for example, non-accepted cultures. So if you're, say, France and you conquer the Netherlands and you don't accept Dutch and Brabantic culture, etc., then slowly but surely the Netherlands will convert to French culture.
What do you think makes MEIOU and Taxes an appealing overhaul mod? And what elements of other mods do you appreciate?
I think the main thing where we differ from vanilla is you can basically look at strategy games along a spectrum from how much do they abstract history and the real world, and how much do they try to simulate it. And you could, for example, say that base Europa Universalis 4 is already a lot more simulation than, say, a game like Civilization 5 or 6. But MEIOU and Texas basically moves Europa Universalis 4 a lot more on this slider towards simulation. So we're still not simulating everything. I mean, we can't. But we're simulating a hell of a lot more.
In terms of the level of challenge presented by 3.0, is someone going to need 20 hours of practice, 30 pages of tutorials, consultations with experts? How is it? How difficult is it?
100 hours of practice.
I think it definitely differs a bit. Like, you know, based on, like, say, if you have experience with 2.52, it shouldn't be that radical a departure. In the sense, there's new systems that you got to learn, but they're also hands-off. They're more able to be hands-off. You know, say in 2.5, you need to build every building to develop your cities. In 3.0, the infrastructure and building systems are a bit more self-guided, and also the economy has more ability to sort of run itself. But at the same time, there's a lot of depth. You know, there's like, if you really want to edit and get in there in the economy and start making changes, start investing certain things, till the scales, if you get in there, there's potential to break the economy, yes, and yeah, there's always risk. But in that sense, there's several automation systems we built to kind of ease new players into it. And of course, we'll try to provide as much wiki advice and just in-game kind of tutorial type advice to help adjust new players. I mean, Gigau might be able to speak a bit more to this, having played it on his streams recently.
Yeah, and that leads that's a good segue, because I was going to say there was a Reddit post based on one of my streams says, I'm worried because he seems to be going to war and not doing much for the economy. Is it really like a bonsai and you just make it pretty and you don't do much? And indeed, that session I had been more going to war than taking care of my economy. And so you get to choose. That's one neat thing with the way 3.0 is now, is that if you want to be really hands-on, you can do a lot into your economy and so on, but you can let it roll a bit. It will obviously not be as optimal. And that's for sure. When you look at how I run my country, it's far less than optimal. But you can let it run a bit. You can have like a session where you let it run and you use what you've built previously, and then go back to rebuilding your economy. So it's not optimal, but you can choose basically how you will play it.
This is something that I think you told me when I was first getting access, I think 18 months ago, to the initial one of the initial influencer alpha builds of 3.0. I mean, I've probably been in game in 3.0 for 100 hours, and I basically haven't unpaused. Whereas you can just start the game and begin playing immediately. It's very much how much do you want to try and grasp and be good at, and you can kind of pick your own difficulty level to an extent there.
Sorry, yeah, I wanted to add one more thing. I think you could say that in vanilla EU4, you're basically some kind of god king. You can click buttons to increase the development in your provinces and boom, you have magically huge cities, stuff like that. While in 3.0, you are much more like a ruler with a limited amount of things you can do. Basically, you can talk to everyone, you can interact with every province, just like in real life, but it'll cost you a lot of time and effort, and well, not everyone wants to work with you. Like, you can decide, I want to build a huge city on the Isle of Man, but probably it will be very hard, and you might very well not succeed.
Cool.
So it's your choice how much you want to interact with it. Just like in real life, a ruler can be lazy or an obsessive perfectionist.
If you were to advise Paradox on making a new engine, which would be more moddable, what would you suggest?
So in general, of course, we have a lot of wishes for stuff that Paradox could include. There are a lot of possibilities, which are basically mainly, well, move the scripting language more in the direction of an actual, like, well, coding language, right? Normal programming language. But the most important things would basically be arrays, because arrays enable you to do a lot of things in terms of data storing and finding data with indices and stuff like that. This is a huge part, especially because 3.0 uses a lot of data, right? So this would be good. Then besides that, well, moddable GUI, of course, moddable UI is always a key point which we want, but yeah, we will probably not get in EU4, but it's already present in other Paradox titles, so it's definitely possible, and it might happen in EU5, I would assume. Yeah, and then there are a number of other minor topics, like being able to, well, create modifiers with variable inputs, so not having two preset modifiers, but just using a variable to set, well, for example, you get that much text, this is the variable, right? This is at the moment not possible. You have to use workarounds. So yeah, of course, there would be a lot of possibilities to improve, well, all of the modding capabilities, right?
Next up, we have a question that is listed on my document as both asked and answered by me, which is always fun. So, will you add ages into 3.0? And this is I know this is a conversation that's ongoing within the dev team, but the answer that someone else has put in, that it will be added in by means of submodding by me. So that's always fun. But ideally, yes, whether or not it ends up being officially included, which it still may, you can expect to see an ages submod to bring that mechanic into 3.0. Next question, also coming from me. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, perhaps to add upon this point of ages, like, we have been thinking about them for a long time right now, and the whole problem with them is basically that they are global, right? So, for example, Europe will be, like, if you think about history, Europe will be in a different age than China, let's say, right? The ages are not the same. And this is, well, kind of the problem with the whole feature. So we are not quite sure how, well, to make it make sense, right? So if it's global, you need to have very generalized categories of time, which then makes it a little bit of, well, arbitrary, right? It's just hard to design, not hard to implement.
Has Diplo annexing costs changed at all in 3.0?
Not majorly. It's basically the same system as it was in 2.5. It's a little bit influenced by politics, like what structure does your realm have? It influences a little bit how costly annexations are and what subject types you have. But in terms of like cost per development, it's the same. The development numbers, of course, are different in 3.0 than in 2.5. But yeah, this is just a balancing topic. So if it's too expensive, we will tune it down. If it's, well, not expensive enough, we will tune it up.
How is the lag and performance in general in 3.0 compared to 2.52?
I think we're trying to optimize it as best as we can, but the simple truth is that we are calculating a hell of a lot of more things than in the previous version of the mod. So basically, performance is, well, kind of an issue. You can expect us to do everything we can to optimize it as far as possible, but as many may know, the MEIOU and Texas mod runs a lot slower than vanilla, and I think you can expect 3.0 to perform roughly as well as the 2.52 version or slightly slower. That is the honest answer. We wanted to make it much faster, and in the beginning of our development have made statements like, yeah, we will do this, but yeah, truth is, simulating the whole world in population and the trade system and the entire supply and demand economy is, yeah, it's heavy.
Fair enough. It turns out there's a lot.
Yeah, we remain true to our motto. If we don't push the engine to its limits, we're not trying hard enough.
A rather specific question, this one. Will Iran finally be able to have decent communication efficiency in 3.0?
Yes. Mainly, we've redone all national ideas to have kind of a more legacy-based focus in terms of, like, you know, the legacy of the Iranian people. So in that sense, one of their key NIs is a notable reduction in their communication efficiency times. So plus the terrain's been reworked and we're still working on that. Overall, you can guarantee it's at the very least better than 2.5, and there's still ongoing work to really nail why Persian empires were able to rule Iran without just having Red Sea everywhere. So.
The MEIOU and Taxes team is out here answering the questions of why Persia existed. Will the AI be more competent at colonizing in 3.0? And by what date can one reasonably expect the Americas to be colonized?
Answer is yes. It will be more competent. We have a lot better colonization than in 2.52, that's for sure.
Yeah, the DI is definitely improved just because it's using an actual system, whereas before that didn't exist, right? So we now have this expedition system where you can send an expedition to a colonizing zone, and then you will get a province there, and then DI from there on will colonize outwards, right? With vanilla feature, which makes DI way more focused on central nodes, right? Like on specific nodes, because you can only get a foothold there with the expedition. And the expedition has a rather good AI, I would say.
If you were able to rename the mod at this stage, how would you rename it?
Why would we rename it? Why would we rename our trademark?
The name is perfect. I'm not sure who asked this question, but
I think the only name that's appropriate if we didn't have MEIOU is just more bullet point initials. Make it even more of an acronym. It's the only way forward.
Yeah.
That brings us to the end of our Q&As from the community. Thank you so much for asking those. We're sorry if we didn't get time to include your question. Obviously, there were tons of great ones, and if you haven't got an answer yet, head to the Discord or to the forums or to Reddit, wherever you want to ask those, and hopefully a dev can find time to give you the answer to that.